people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Former 2-division champion Danny Garcia on fighting Jaron Ennis. He says he has his own journey and I have mine.
High risk, low reward, huh?
Listen, I could forgive Danny Garcia passing on a Jaron Ennis fight if he had something bigger in mind, something bigger on the docket, something bigger and better to do, something lined up.
But the man hasn't fought in over a year.
What the hell's he so busy with? He says, it's boxing, like I said before. Anything can happen, so you can never say never, Garcia said of fighting Ennis in an interview with Fight Hub TV. But as far as I know, I feel like he's got his own journey, and I've got my own journey. I earned my stripes in the game already. He's gonna build his legacy, and I'm looking for bigger and better things.
And he said he plans on going up to junior middleweight.
It has been some time since he said that, though he hasn't officially arrived in the junior middleweight division. There is talk of a potential offer.
Ben Shalom of Boxer said he'd like to make a fight between Brooke and Danny.
Danny Garcia, at 154 pounds, at a full 154 pounds, at junior middleweight, I like the sound of that fight, though I'm not optimistic.
I think Danny could make good money in that fight.
I think it would be so out of character
Yeah.
of an American-based fighter, a PBC fighter specifically. I think it would be so out of character, Danny Garcia traveling to the United Kingdom to box the likes of a Cal Brock at 154 pounds for the payday, of course, because they have to make it worth his while. Better still,
Yeah.
I think it would be such a drastic deviation from the norm, from what we expect, that Garcia versus Brooke in the UK could actually put asses in the seats. I think it could.
I think a move like that would take a lot of people by surprise, though I don't expect it to happen.
Danny Garcia says, Philly supports Philly. He's a young, hungry, upcoming fighter. He's almost there to be a champion, but I feel as far as him, like I told him, he's gonna build his own legacy, just like I built my own legacy, you know what I'm saying? Like I said before, I think the welterweight division in 1 or 2 more fights is gonna open up, and I feel like he's gonna be the one to take over the division.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Don't get me wrong, I think Jaron Ennis is a very talented fighter, but what I also think is that he's a very big welterweight. He's on the much bigger end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go. So when you think about the next couple of years at welterweight, what you have to ask yourself is, how much longer can Jaron Ennis keep making that weight? How much longer can he keep cutting down to 147 pounds when he's a big guy? He's a noticeably bigger guy than what welterweights we've become familiar with. Terrence Crawford, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia. I mean, the way I see it, where Danny Garcia feels that Jaron Ennis might be the heir apparent to the welterweight division, what I see is that Jaron Ennis may be joining Danny Garcia at junior middleweight in the near future. Perhaps not in his next fight or his next 2 fights, but I don't think he's going to be at welterweight.
He's a big guy, and in a year's time, he might move up in weight.
A year, maybe a year and a half, maybe. For the time being, Jaron Ennis ain't going to be fighting Danny Garcia. He's going to be fighting Custio Clayton in an IBF final eliminator in order to secure a mandatory position to become the mandatory challenger for the IBF title.
I don't think very many people are expecting Danny Garcia to fight this guy.
He's a high risk and a low reward for the likes of a Danny Garcia, but that's just it. Ideally, a guy like a Danny Garcia, a familiar face, a guy who's been around the block, he's been a champion before, at this weight. Ideally, this is the kind of guy you want to see a Jaron Ennis Boots fight. I mean, ideally, a serviceable guy, an experienced guy.
That is the kind of fight you want to see Jaron Ennis in.
Danny Garcia, to some degree, is still a serviceable fighter. He didn't look shot to bits in his last outing with Errol Spence Jr. He still looked capable, durable.
He's never been knocked out.
Think about Danny Garcia. Potential fights with the likes of a Jaron Ennis, a Virgil Ortiz, and Alexis Rocha.
Maybe he stays at welterweight, maybe he fights Terrence Crawford.
There are fights out there. intriguing ones for Danny Garcia. There's still fights out there left for him in the welterweight division. At junior middleweight, there are fights up there for Danny too. Kell Brook fight.
I'd like to see Tim Tszyu beat the fuck out of Danny Garcia.
I'd like to see that. There are fights out there for Danny, but if there are this many fights out there for Danny, this many options, this many opportunities, why isn't anyone expecting him to capitalize on them? And it's because Danny Garcia is not strapped for cash.
He's not outside of boxing. He deals in real estate.
That's the story. Outside of pugilism, he has other sources of revenue to where he's not scratching and sniffing and strapped for cash, looking for the very next fight, Whatever money he's making, it's enough money that he didn't box all of last year. Doesn't seem to be batting an eyelash over his next fight.
No, I mean, he doesn't really seem like he's in a hurry to get back in the ring.
No, not in a hurry. I mean, he said something about going up to 154 pounds. He had all of last year to make his debut at 154 pounds, make that maiden voyage. He didn't make it.
Maybe it's because he didn't need to.
Between the money that he made boxing Errol Spence Jr. in late 2020 and whatever money he's making in real estate and his other outside endeavors, perhaps this is a guy that doesn't need to be in any hurry to get back in the ring. There's that to consider, and how selective he's being. He looks at a guy like Jaron Ennis, and it's a high-risk, low-reward fight for Danny.
And maybe he's well off enough financially that he don't need to take a risk like that.
Not from where he's sitting, anyway. Guys like me and you, we look at Danny, we say, make yourself useful.
Fight somebody.
Danny's treading carefully, being very selective, because he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to fight somebody, just anybody. Financially, he's well off enough that he doesn't need to take high-risk, low-reward fights like a Jaron Ennis fight, even though ideally that's the role that a Danny Garcia is intended to fulfill. In pugilism, in prize fighting, in boxing, the old lion versus the young lion, the familiar face versus the unbeaten up-and-comer.
Yeah, I'd love to see Jaron Ennis knock this fucking guy out because I think that he can.
But I don't think that Danny Garcia is going to give him that opportunity because it's more of an opportunity for Jaron Ennis than it is for Danny Garcia. Danny's got enough cash to where he ain't got to take those kinds of risks, and that's why we've seen so little of him in the last year or so.
That's how we can explain it.
A guy that ain't boxed in the last 12 months being a picky eater, being picky with his food, well, that's how you can wrap your mind around that.
Hey, Danny Garcia is food for guys like Jaron Ennis.
He fucking knows that. He's got to tread carefully in what remains of his boxing career. In men's middleweight news, via Mike Coppinger and his sources, Janibek Alimkhanuly versus Danny Dignum set for interim middleweight title bout May 21st. Janibek Alimkhanuly and Danny Dignum will meet for the WBO's interim middleweight title on May 21st, sources tell ESPN. No location has been finalized for the top-ranked boxing ESPN main event, but the bout will take place in the United States. Former 130-pound title holder Jamel Herring, who lost his belt to Shakur Stevenson in October. He will return at 135 pounds in his comeback fight in the chief support bout, sources said. Janibek was ordered to fight Demetrius Andrade for his middleweight title, but Andrade elected to instead move up to super middleweight for a fight with Zach Parker.
So Jamel Herring's moving up to lightweight.
The former WBO champion expressed some interest in taking on Matchroom's own Kenichi Ogawa, that division's reigning IBF champion, newly crowned, but I guess he didn't have any luck.
I guess Eddie Hearn didn't oblige him.
There are fights up there at lightweight for Jamel Herring. When it comes to Janibek was ordered to fight Demetrius Andrade for his middleweight title, but Andrade elected to move up to super middleweight for a fight with Zach Parker on May 21st in the United Kingdom. Andrade will have 10 days to decide which weight class he'll campaign at moving forward. So Janibek Dignum appears to be a rare interim title fight that could quickly crown a full-fledged champion. Janibek, a 28-year-old from Kazakhstan,
He's from Kazakhstan, like Gennady Golovkin.
scored consecutive 8th-round TKOs over Rob Brandt and Hassan Ndam. He's ranked at number 7 by ESPN.
I think he's going to win a WBO title.
That interim WBO title that could see him become this division's full-fledged WBO champion. I don't think that comes as a secret to anyone. I think Janibek Alimkhanuly, I think he's got what it takes to beat Danny Dignum. I don't know much about Danny, though I'm going to give him a look.
Ahead of this May fight date, I will.
I have had my fill of Janibek Alimkhanuly fights, and that is how I arrived at the conclusion that he does have what it takes to become this division's WBO champion. That's what I think about that. Beyond that fight, though.
What happens beyond Danny Dignum?
Beyond the interim title, and even beyond becoming this division's full-fledged champion, which is what I think is going to happen. Beyond that, you have to wonder what the future holds for Janibek Alimkhanuly in what is today's middleweight division.
I don't expect him to fight the winner of Murata versus Golovkin unless the winner is Ryota Murata.
He admires Gennady Golovkin. He's not willing to face his countrymen, and he expressed that sentiment via his own social media. Now, if Ryota Murata upsets the apple cart for Gennady Golovkin, I do expect Janibek to target him.
So now he's fighting unbeaten Danny Dignum.
Guy's got a weird-shaped head.
Sports a professional record of 14 wins, no losses, with 1 draw, 8 knockouts.
A southpaw from Essex in the United Kingdom, standing in at about 6'1". A southpaw like Janibek Alimkhanuly is a southpaw.
Janibek sports a professional record of 11 wins, no losses, no draws.
7 knockouts and what is a very fan-friendly style. I mean, Janibek Alimkhanuly has the potential to become a popular fighter, though not necessarily due to big fights with big names like, Jamal Charlo, Jaime Munguia. I don't expect him to be able to get fights with those guys, but what Top Rank and ESPN can do for him is get him out there, keep him out there, and keep him busy. Keep showing people what he can do. Even if he can't get a big name or a big marquee fight with a big marquee fighter,
This guy ought to be fighting 3 times a year.
he's got 11 pro fights. This will be his 12th, this Danny Dignum fight. And if he beats that guy, he ought to fight 2 more times this year. Because in the absence of a big name, in the absence of a marquee fight with a marquee fighter, the most you can do is continue to familiarize an audience with him. Only hardcore boxing fans are aware of Janibek's existence and what he can do. The fact that he's trained by veteran trainer, former fighter, Buddy McGirt.
Janibek is a strong puncher with a strong corner.
Good strong corner and a fan-friendly style, fighting on a major platform. Most people will tell you that, before Gennady Golovkin became a bit of a fan favorite in his own respect, all he could do was fight the man who was in front of him, fight the man opposite the ring, racking up highlight reel knockouts that led him to become a more popular fighter. I think something similar applies to Janibek Alimkhanuly, with the difference being that Janibek is a top-ranked fighter.
He's got a major promoter behind him, and he fights on a major platform, a major network.
He can get the kind of exposure, his career, here and now, that his countryman Gennady Golovkin wasn't getting certain stages of his career, the earlier stages, to where he wasn't a fan favorite, wasn't known by very many people. Janibek Alimkhanuly has an opportunity here that Gennady Golovkin did not have until later on in his career.
He landed on HBO.
Janibek Alimkhanuly is 28 years old now, fighting on the biggest sports network in the country, so they can get eyes on his fights, and they can get eyes on him. So, more times you get him out there, the more times you let him fight and show his shit, more people can familiarize themselves with him, even in the absence of marquee names like a, Demetrius Andrade or a Jamal Charlo. These aren't big names, you understand. No ways near the level of a Canelo Alvarez or a Gennady Golovkin, for example, but these are the more familiar faces in today's middleweight division. I think Janibek is going to struggle to get fights with fighters like that. I mean, look at Jaime Munguia. He's supposed to be fighting Daniel Jacobs at a catchweight.
Demetrius Andrade's moving up to super middleweight, and I don't expect that he'll return.
In this division's WBC champion Jamal Charlo, he's supposed to be boxing Poland's own Maciej Suliecki. Fat chance of him crossing over to the ESPN side of things for a high-risk, low-reward guy, even a high-risk, low-reward champion like a Janibek Alimkhanuly. Could be, potentially.
Yeah, Janibek is going to struggle to get fights.
Struggle, the word struggle. Use that term loosely. He's not going to get fights with those guys. He's not going to get fights with those fighters. So the most the Top Rank and ESPN can do for him is get him out there often, get him out there regularly to familiarize their audience with this fighter.
28 years old with 11 fights.
He ain't exactly got all the time in the world. And if he makes short work of Danny Dignum with minimal damage, if it doesn't prove to be an arduous fight, if he takes care of this guy, takes care of him good, get him out there 2 more times this year. Finally, unbeaten up-and-comer Edgar Berlanga says, I have the necessary tools to become the next Miguel Cotto or Tito Trinidad.
No, he doesn't.
The showing he just had against Steve Rolls was semblant to the showing he had before that against Marcelo Coceres.
Looked limited then, and he looks limited now.
Edgar said, apparently the fans have gotten used to me winning fights in the first round, but I'm grateful for this experience. I had the opportunity to fight for 10 rounds against a veteran boxer with a lot of experience. It is something very positive for my career, said Berlanga to Eduardo Solano. Against Rolls, the 5,158 fans in the small venue inside the legendary Madison Square Garden expected more from the Brooklyn native, who won with scores of 96-94, 97-93, 97-93. Berlanga will return to the ring June 11th as part of Top Rank's planned card for the weekend of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. All the people are waiting for me to knock out my opponents, but what they don't know is that boxing is not just about knockouts. You have to go out there and put on a show. You have to look good. And the truth is that I feel very upset and disappointed that I didn't give my fans what they wanted. I'm very angry about that, Berlanga said. I hurt my elbow during the second round. It was hurting for a while as I was throwing the jab, but as I mentioned, I'm very upset with myself for not being able to win this fight with a knockout.
During the broadcast, they said Edgar enlisted the aid of K. Karoma and Mickey Bay.
That's on top of Edgar working with his already existing trainer, Andre Rosier. And I don't know, maybe he's going to need a few more fights with those guys in his corner before we start to see a difference, before it actually starts to take effect.
Because right now, he don't look like the heir apparent to the Puerto Rican throne of boxing. You know who does?
Xander Zayas, that's who. That kid's more than just a puncher. He's more than just a hard-hitting guy. That kid can box.
Man, can that kid fucking box?
Edgar stated, I realized the fans wanted me to knock him out, to do something big. I couldn't give them what they asked for. I hope things are different on June 11th, during the weekend of the Puerto Rican Day Parade, since I'm already looking forward to that date. I can become the next Puerto Rican superstar. I have the power. I have the power in my punches. I have the talent and also the charisma. If I continue to do what I have done until today, it will happen. I know the expectation of the people. They are expecting me to knock them all out, just because of what I did in my first 16 opponents. Nobody wants to see me in a long fight. They find it's boring. But I know I have the necessary tools to become the next Miguel Cotto or Tito Trinidad. That has yet to be determined.
You know, it's not even that he didn't knock Steve Rolls out.
Not for me, anyway. Edgar made a very valid point that not every fight has to end in a knockout. In boxing ain't always about knockouts. You know, it really isn't. You can win a fight decisively and still put on a show, but therein lies the dilemma for Edgar. He looked very flustered with the mobile Steve Rolls on those 37-year-old legs.
Edgar Berlanga, he's 24 years old, sporting a professional record of 19 wins, no losses, no draws with 16 knockouts.
For what it's worth, I think the power is real. I think the kid can punch. I think he's got punch. I think he's got that much. The problem is delivering that power, delivering that punch, those punches. Edgar looked a little bit too limited out there. Didn't see enough of a jab or
much in terms of volume. He wasn't busy.
He looked bothered by the movement of Steve Rolls, who he accused of running post-fight.
What do you expect a guy to do? Stop moving, stand right in front of you?
You get the sense that in Edgar's last two fights, what they've been trying to do is match him against moving targets so that he can learn to catch up to them, cut the ring off, and deliver his power. But his last two fights, he hasn't looked like the same wrecking machine.
That's what Coceres and Rolls got in common. They're moving targets.
It wasn't just catching up to moving targets that made Edgar look less than spectacular. He didn't show much in terms of a work rate. He wasn't a busy puncher. He looked like a guy who's looking for one or two big shots to do the guy so he can go home early, and one or two big shots ain't gonna do it.
Growing pains is what we're looking at.
Edgar Berlanga's a well-connected guy. He's rubbing elbows with some very famous people, and they've spent a lot of time promoting this guy. They spent so much time promoting this guy that now perhaps he has too many eyes on him, more than he should, while he's developing as a fighter.
You know, boxing fans are assholes. They won't hesitate to criticize you over anything.
Everything, and as stated, I don't know if it's going to take one or two more fights before the effects of Mickey Bay and K. Karoma being in his corner. I don't know if it's going to take one or two more fights for the effects of them being there to take effect.
He can't keep going out there looking like that.
He's got power. He's got charisma. He's got friends in high places. But what he needs is more of a jab, a judicious, ever-present jab, to set up the power shots.
Good right hand take you around the block, but a good jab, that'll take you around the world.
That's what he needs.